Are you going to start? Do I have to start?
I will start. We will guide you.
Well, thank
we
you,
will.
I'm getting the feeling Jim hasn't listened to any of our podcasts. I'm getting the sense.
I have to walk the dog. I'm a busy guy.
That's when people normally listen to podcasts, Jim.
know that.
This might be our
enjoy
intro. This might be our intro. Do I start or do you start? That's how we're going to start this episode.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me today are Pastors Jim and Brian.
Hello.
Hi.
And Brian and I actually have the distinct privilege today to get to hear a little bit of Jim's testimony, parts of which we've heard over the years in various formats, but we get to grill you, Jim. That's basically what we're here to do.
Oh, wonderful. My wife does that pretty often, so I'm used to it. It's good. Okay. Yeah.
This will be just like that.
Okay.
So, as we've been started with Pastor Reggie, and as we've told you we're going to be doing, we wanted to provide a context, an opportunity for pastoral testimonies, for you to get an opportunity to hear a little bit about how the Lord has brought our various pastors to where they are in their lives, and also how he's worked kind of along the way. So in the next 40 minutes, Jim, we want you to tell the whole story.
Not nearly enough time. I need a day or two.
That'll be maybe we'll start a podcast. Just the whole podcast will be Pastor Jim.
Perfect.
Afternoons with Pastor Jim.
There you go.
And we will release it weekly. And after like 3 years, we'll have, gotten
know the whole story.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The threat is
exactly.
that Matt will no longer be able to call this podcast the #1 podcast at Cornerstone Church.
Oh, that podcast would dwarf us for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. All right. I feel good about being the #2 podcast at Cornerstone. I'm okay with that. All right, so let's jump in a little bit, Jim. Where were you first exposed to Jesus?
Well, pretty early on, I grew up in a church-going family. My father was a farmer in Oklahoma. My mother had been a school teacher and married him, and as happens in those days, she quit working and stayed at home. But they both went into town to the Methodist church there, and so and the story of that is it was a controversial thing from the beginning. In this small town, the Baptist church and the Methodist church were across the street from each other, and they didn't talk. If you're a Baptist, you didn't talk to the Methodists, and vice versa. So when my dad walked across the street to ask my mom out on a date, that was a big deal. So
because she was Baptist?
Because she was Methodist.
Oh, she was Methodist and he was Baptist.
Yes, right.
Oh,
So yeah.
scandalous.
So I always noticed when we went to church that there would be this moment where people would stop and stare across the street at each other, and I had no idea what that was about. I thought that was part of what you did at church somehow. I had no idea. But
Do we know what their beef was? Like why they were so? I mean, there's not a lot of bad blood historically between Baptists and Methodist. Like they're not like known for their.
There's no real drama in a small town, so you have to create it. See? So that's the best thing I can figure. I mean, I had uncles who wouldn't talk to my father, but they'd talk to me. So it was kind of just those kinds of small town tensions. But I went to church. I went to Sunday school growing up. There were all kinds of moments I look back on that I think God used. We had the funny thing about the Methodists is sometimes they wanted to hear the gospel and sometimes they didn't. And so at one point they got a pastor who actually preached the Bible, and people did not like that. And later on he was fired. And what happened was years later I wound up having a paper route in town, and he was on my paper route. And he remembered me, and he would come out and sit with me on the curb and get his newspaper for me. And we'd talk for like an hour or so. And I think that probably was my first exposure to, he asked me questions about faith. I was like, I don't know, 5th grade or something like that. So
after he'd been fired from the church?
After he'd been fired from church, yeah.
Oh.
He moved into town, pastored the church for, I think, 3 years, something like that, bought a house, and then got fired. And so, he already owned the house. He didn't know what to do. So he stayed in town and commuted to another town where he was a pastor. But he was on my paper route. And I just think that was a God thing. I just think that was the start of the whole thing. That was the first time I became aware that the Bible was something other than kind of gobbledygook or like children's stories.
I love that phrase. You use that phrase a lot.
What, gobbledygook?
Well, yes. But
it's not where I was
not the
going.
one Scott was
Not
talking
incorrect. No, it was a God thing.
Oh,
I just
yeah.
feel like whenever you tell a story, there's just a God thing is constantly pops up because it's the Lord's sovereign orchestrating in all these
Yeah.
incredible ways.
Yeah, he just dips into my life every once in a while, all along there. It's like very annoying, but that's what he did. And we had a tough time. So several things happened. I had asthma. My mother had asthma. We had trouble living in the country. My dad's wheat crop failed 3 summers in a row, and so Mom had to go to work, and she had to work in another town, and so we moved around a lot. And we kind of stopped going to church at that point because we were in other towns, and it kind of faded off into the distance. But my mother and I both had asthma. It was very bad. So the doctor said, "You've got to move." So she wound up getting a job in Albuquerque, New Mexico, when I was in, I think, junior high school. And so we moved completely out of the state. My dad stayed to do the farm, and he would commute back and forth to Albuquerque, but we lived there and started going to a Methodist church there. And oddly enough, another pastor was hired who preached the Bible at that Methodist church and got in trouble. But he became kind of more than a pastor or preacher. He became a friend, more to me actually than to my mother. And so I wound up going to the Methodist Youth Fellowship, which is the thing that high schoolers did at that time. And I wound up becoming like president of the youth group. Methodists are very organized. And I wound up becoming president of the state Methodist Youth Organization, all because of this pastor kind of mentoring me and pushing me. And he was my advisor. And so I had this odd year where I traveled around to youth fellowships around the state and would do like little teaching things in the youth group, or once in a while I'd do a retreat or something like that. I was preaching, and he was helping me preach. And I thought it was very cool that I was such, a cool guy that I could do that. And, I had lots of dates, and it was very, very impressive.
This is a world that I'm not familiar with.
It is,
Yeah.
And not only that, but, Jim, you tell this story, and in it, I see this model of both relational ministry in your life, but also a model of people who would teach the Bible and then get in trouble. I feel like that's like your pastoral calling as well. Like teach the Bible.
It's pretty good. Yeah. Like a business card.
It never occurred to me it was my fault.
Jim Leonard, he teaches the Bible and gets in trouble.
Yeah, it's like, don't come around me because you're just gonna ruin the day you do that.
Okay, so you were very popularly preaching in contexts across New Mexico, or?
Yes, all over New Mexico and West Texas. I put probably, 10,000 miles on the family car driving all these places. My parents
What'd your mom think about all this?
Well, she thought it was cool. My dad was a little perturbed, but my mom thought it was cool. And she's the one kind of who allowed it. It meant she had to stay home on weekends because I had the car and I was in, Santa Fe or, somewhere in Texas or something.
Huh.
So it was quite a sacrifice. The critical point for me comes at the end of that year. It's my senior year. I'm graduating. Vietnam is a big deal. Pretty much anybody who doesn't go to college is going to get drafted. They're pretty much sure they're going to get drafted. I did not want to go to Vietnam. But I didn't know what to do about college. My older brother was already in school, and he was taking pretty much all the family money for tuition. So there was no money for me to go to college. So I assumed that I would sooner or later just be drafted. But this same pastor called me up and asked me what I was doing, and I said nothing. And he said, "Let's get you going at something." He got me a job in Arkansas at a church camp for the summer, counseling kids. Again, it's a Christian camp. But on our way back, he kept talking to me about college and saying, "Would you go if I could find a way for you to go?" And I don't think I'm college material yet. We're driving very slowly across Oklahoma. The campus in Arkansas, we're going back to New Mexico. He's driving very slowly across Oklahoma. And finally I say, okay, yeah, I guess they would. He says, okay, I already get the place for you. He immediately turns south and heads down to Abilene, Texas, where there's a Methodist college.
Hmm.
And he had already enrolled me. He got me.
He
got me
loved you and had a wonderful plan for your life.
Yeah, he got me a scholarship. He got me a job on campus. He got me a second job off campus, and a loan. And I was in college. And suddenly I was exempt from the draft, and I was on a whole different course that I never anticipated or thought would happen. I had no plans for college at all.
Huh.
So that was kind of weird. Okay, so the crisis comes. I become president of the college group across the street from the campus. We put on a retreat. We're studying Bonhoeffer at the retreat. We have a speaker. I'm reading a section from one of Bonhoeffer's books. And I realize I'm at the retreat. I'm in charge of the retreat. I'm sitting on a bench on the pathway from where they're speaking and where the dormitories are. And it occurs to me, I don't believe any of this. I don't believe there's a God. I don't believe that Jesus is Jesus. I don't believe anything that Bonhoeffer's saying in this about what the reality of God is.
This is the left turn people didn't see coming.
Nope.
Yep. I didn't see it coming.
Yeah.
So it just happens that my kind of vice president guy, my assistant who does everything at the retreat, walks along and says, anything I can do? I said, yeah, you need to take over the retreat. I'm leaving. And I left right then. It was just wrong for me to be there.
Okay.
So I went back to the dorm and I began to apply to colleges that were secular and that didn't have any. So I wound up at University of New Mexico back in Albuquerque, oddly enough. And I joined a fraternity and drank a lot of beer and kind of just went off the deep end for 2.5 years until I graduated.
Just like that. I mean,
yeah, just like that.
Left the retreat, left school.
Yeah. I just didn't, if you don't believe in God, what's all this? Why would you do any of this? Why would you be college? Why would I be at a Christian school?
Yeah.
It was just all. And so that was a turning point for me, big time. I met a girl there from the University of Michigan. We really liked each other, but she was going back to do a master's program and I was graduating. So I thought that was the end of that. But I moved to Los Angeles. A friend of mine, went out for a trip with him to visit his parents out here. And second day I was out there, I was looking around and somebody asked me if I'd like a job at City Hall in Los Angeles. And I said, okay. And they took me into an interview room and I came out with a job. So it's another turning point.
Was applying to City Hall a little different back then? Like that's
It was, boy, was it ever.
Wow.
It was very different. So I wound up working for the city. I went home, packed my stuff, got in my car and drove back out and began my career in LA.
Mm-hmm.
And my girlfriend in Michigan got a job in Long Beach. And so she came out too. And so we started dating. And that was our lives. We were just doing that and, having fun on weekends. Okay, so now I have to fast forward like 10 years and we're married.
So 10 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to fast forward. I think it's the right thing to do for the story, but I don't want to lose the fact that it wasn't like, oh, okay, then we did that for a month and then we're like, oh, what are we doing? Or did that for a year, 10 years, that's life.
Yeah.
Right? You're just, your life is established in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of a lot of people's, maybe even neighbors or friends who they've been here 10 years. You're like, oh, I guess everything's established. I guess this is what it is. So, okay. So 10 years goes by and you got married in the intervening time.
Yes. Yeah. We got married and actually pretty quickly. And so, we're married most of that time. Mm-hmm. We're now living in Santa Monica. She's working on this west side. At that point, I've quit the city, gone to Loyola, gotten a master's degree in writing, film and writing, and am trying to make a career out of that. And it's not going well, and our marriage is not doing well. And Mary, my wife, was really feeling very stressed out. One evening, we're in bed, and she says, do you have a Bible? And I said, no, I don't. She said, well, you did all that back in high school, didn't you? I said, yeah, but I didn't keep a Bible. Well, she searches around and finds a Bible that someone gave her when she graduated from high school. And she says, I'm going to read this. okay. And so I know enough about the Bible to be her tutor as she's reading this. She reads it all through the year, through the winter. And somewhere in the spring, she says to me, what do you do if you believe all this is true? And I say, well, you do the sinner's prayer. You preach the sinner's prayer. That's what you do. You have to do the sinner's prayer. So she says, what's that? And so oddly enough, I know how to do the sinner's prayer. Isn't that funny? So we get down, kneel by the bed, and she repeats after me the sinner's prayer. And I'm really, really upset. I'm married to a Christian. That was never my intent.
You're the one that had to lead her to Christ.
I led her to Christ.
Hey,
Under protest.
Under protest, yeah.
Yes, exactly right. I don't know I don't have words for this. But then what happens is over the next few months, she changes. She changes not a little bit. She changes radically. She becomes pretty much a whole new person.
Hmm.
And I was just blown away. I just completely, I was stunned by that. I had no idea where that came from. But I figured it came from the Bible. So I snuck out and bought a paperback copy of the Bible and snuck it in. I had part of the apartment, I had my own little room. And so I hid it in there, and I would go in, and I had a television set, and I'd turn it on.
You didn't want her...
I didn't want her to know.
You didn't want her to know you were reading it.
No, I did not want her to know. And I read that Bible all winter. And somewhere in the course of that, I had a point where I thought, this couldn't be in here, what I'm reading right now about Jesus. This couldn't happen, and people not, if it didn't happen, somebody would say something. This must have happened. And it was a place where Paul writes, there were like 600 people who saw him alive after his resurrection or something like that. And I had this stunning, profound moment that I was kind of, you segue from that park bench on the retreat to this moment in my little office, that those were the parentheses on this period of non-belief. And that I believed again, that there was no way this could not be real in history and not have been contradicted. And so it was a really, really, I was very, very angry that I had to give my life back to Christ again. I was mad about that for weeks. My sense of sovereignty was, just smashed. I was now in the kingdom, under the king. And so a friend of ours came out to visit, and so Mary said, so Jim became a Christian. And she said, well, where are you going to church? Well, we weren't. And so she says, well, let's find a church. And because she had become a Christian, she was Mary's friend from Michigan who had been a total, had struggled with alcohol for a long time. And she had become a Christian and totally given that up. And so for her, it was a very strong motivation to get us in a church. And so she found this church in the Yellow Pages called First Baptist Church of West Los Angeles. And we started coming here. Dr. George Huber was the pastor at that point, and it was a fairly old congregation. Almost everybody in the room was older than us, and they were delighted to see us. They thought, oh yeah, young blood. And he kind of took us under his wing, particularly me, and yeah. And so he put together a group of guys. In those days, distance learning was like they sent you a box full of videotapes of seminary classes, and then he would kind of monitor and mentor those. And it worked okay. It was pretty good, except you couldn't ask much by way of questions back and forth. But they were from Western Seminary in Portland, and they were quite good, and they're very intriguing, and they were powerful. And I really, really loved those courses. We went through several of them together. Now, while this is going on, I had changed employers, working for the city of Santa Monica at that point. And they were sending me to get a degree in counseling because they wanted a counselor on staff at the city for city employees. So they didn't have to hire out. So they were going to make me the counselor. So I was completing a degree, a master's in counseling. And Dr. Huber started talking to me about volunteering to counsel at the church with people who were struggling here. So I said, yeah, I could probably do that. The third factor was Mary contracted leukemia and began to get very, very sick. So there was a crisis point where over about a period of a little over a year, she was in and out of the hospital, nearly died several times, and finally did die on Thanksgiving Day. Wonderful day. And it was actually, it was pretty, she was very, very sick and until about 10 seconds after midnight on Thanksgiving Day. So it's like God kept her alive and so she could die on Thanksgiving. And which was great because I was very thankful. I really was. And I thought that was God's hand. So that was a big mess. It was a big mess here. Everybody knew us. And so that was terrible. I had a refrigerator full of stuff that a lot of the women in the church had made for me to eat. I had people constantly sending me cards. I was inundated with love and affection and food. And I was just devastated. Didn't know how to make this work at all. And so Dr. Huber said, I'd like you to do some counseling in the church just as a volunteer. Would you do that? I said, yeah, I'd be happy to. So this was somehow another of God's little things where I began counseling, and everybody who came out for counseling, and there were a lot, had a loss issue. And so with every counseling session, I felt God pushing me against this loss issue of my own. And the funny thing was I tended to be a good counselor because I had recently experienced that, but also it was healing for me. And I began to realize that God was really powerfully maneuvering me into something, but I felt the hand on me.
Yeah.
So anyway, what the short story from there on is that gradually Dr. Huber worked me into becoming staff.
I want to get there and get to like the pastoral side, but that's a huge life transition to go through. Even looking back on it now, how was it? Through some of those relationships. I want you to talk a little bit more about that transition. When Mary passed, and both the maybe blessing of those in the church, but also the ways in which I imagine there's nothing that can ultimately provide comfort other than the time and reliance on God. I mean, I'm imagining there. What was that like for you?
Well, pretty much horrible.
Yeah.
It's pretty much a nightmare. I'm sort of introverted. I don't really hang out with groups a lot. So I don't think I exactly knew how to even reach out to anybody. I was seeing a counselor, and the counselor said, I really can't do this. I really can't deal with you with this. It's just too big a loss, and I can't handle it. So he fired me. So I kind of wound up fairly isolated. But then what happened was, as I was saying, this kind of line of people, all with loss in their lives, started coming in for counseling, and they became for me some cauterizing force for the pain.
And was that over like days, weeks, months, years?
So over a period of about 3 years. And I was gradually being drawn into doing much more pastoral stuff as well. He was basically setting me up to be a part-time pastor in the church, which he did finally offer. And it worked out that for a certain amount of time, the city was paying me to be a pastor at the church, which is a little odd, but it worked out on my financial timeline, all right? But the other problem was all the women in the church wanted to have me date somebody. They wanted to fill that gap in my life. And so I had this struggle with that. This issue.
That wasn't helpful?
It was not helpful. The first date I had, which was like only about 3 months after Mary died.
Oh.
I went and picked up the young lady, sweet lady. I knew her pretty well. I took her out. I got almost to the restaurant and realized I couldn't do this. I could not be with this woman, even though I liked her and she was sweet, on a date and make it through the night. And I took her back home. I just apologized all of this. It was really, just nightmarish in many ways. It was just awful. It was very painful, emotionally.
So this is the paradox of Jim Leonard. That this is a uniquely hard one to do in podcast format because getting to know you requires, you're someone that requires presence in a way that not necessarily everyone does. Some people can sort of, maybe it's, I don't know why it is, but to watch you both, in a sense, in the same breath, say how horrific it was and how God kept her till 10 seconds on Thanksgiving Day and I was thankful.
Yeah.
Like, I know you well enough to know how these two sort of furious opposites are both true and both furious. To crib from Chesterton there, but it's just for people listening. There's a beauty to this. Like there's what Jim has in a lot of ways is not just wisdom due to living longer than me, but there's a kind of awareness of the world that creates a new set of metrics for how to evaluate things, for what's important and not important, and for how to experience life and how to kind of walk through it. Most people that I know, myself included, tend to want to manage it. My initial instinct is to manage what comes my way. And Jim's initial instinct, well, maybe that's in there, at least over time, has become to take it in, to experience it, to walk with it in ways that I've been encouraged by. Encouraged is too weak of a word. I've been a little enamored with, is probably the best way to put it. I say sometimes, I have a little joke that I want to be Jim when I grow up. And there's I
was going to bring this up today.
Okay. It's true. I mean, there's a way that there's a way that's a joke, cause I'm 40. But there's a way it's very true. There's a kind of demeanor that you have, that comes in some ways through your experience with God and life and Mary and Karen. I mean, we'll get to more, right?
Yeah, yes.
The church experience, like all sorts of things. Yes. But there's a way that those things can harden you or soften you. They can seize you up or they can open you up. And they seem to have opened you up. And that's something that I've always wanted to become more like as I walk through life, as I go through the experiences that God hands me. Can I open up like Jim? Because it's not bright and shiny. That's the beautiful part of it to me. It's not. There's no Thomas Kincaid to it. It's just very honest and also very welcoming and hospitable. So I don't know. There's more we can talk about, but for people listening, I can see there might be a dissonance for someone who doesn't know Jim the way that we do, and maybe it comes across in the way you're talking. It's funny to me right now that usually we need like 3 people in here to make sure that it's not boring. But with you, it's just kind of just let them talk, like it's like the story itself, but also the way you speak, the way you articulate the things that have happened to you, the way you conceive of them is just different enough, I think, to make it interesting in a way that people will want to say, that's what an interesting way. My sovereignty got smashed. These are sentences that someone else says and they're sort of cliche, but you say it because you mean it because that's what happened, and you just sort of had to deal with it. And there's something so anyway, for those listening, I'm trying to give a little bit of context to Jim, to help you grasp that these are things worth holding on to. These are things worth pondering, that these experiences have created in him something very beautiful and very worth thinking about how we might follow in that as we walk through life. Yeah. So, this is Brian sort of inserting himself more to the story.
No, I mean, I think it's the genuine reality with which you experience life and even the pains, but the way that the genuineness doesn't steal the hope. I think sometimes we try to manage it because we're afraid that if we feel it with its full force, it's going to steal our hope. And Jim, you experience, it seems like you walk into all these things, experiencing the fullness of them, but with this hope that looking back can laugh in a fascinating way.
You know, and in some way, there's nothing else to do. I mean, you either laugh or you cry. But and you're quite right, though. I think that somewhere in there, I began to realize that I have to do each day meaningfully. I have to think through, okay, background, present understanding, possible future. How do those all fit together in God's hand on me in this moment? And I think particularly that time I was just talking about was where that all it was a kind of a clash they all came together really forcefully at that moment. I didn't know what to do with all that. I had just a monumental sense of loss. I mean, it was just horrendous. We had just finally both become believers. We were just both putting our marriage back together and wonderfully, wonderfully happy. And then she gets very, very sick and is tortured by this horrible disease and then dies. And I watch all this and I'm thinking helplessly, pretty much, you know. And then I'm in a community of people who, you know, are very aware of it, and they are kind of on me every day and every Sunday, particularly. You know, oh, you poor boy, or here, have some pie. And it sounds terrible. They were very sincere, and it was very sweet. You know,
Yeah.
I probably gained 20 pounds, but it was really they were very, very. The women in the church, particularly, were very, very ministering to me. I think the men had no clue how to do anything. George Huber was great, but otherwise, I don't think anybody quite knew what to do. But the women, they would just come up and put their arm around me or their hand on my shoulder or something, and just kind of ministered to me as best they could.
Mm.
And that was public, so it was everybody kind of knew.
Yeah. So it was shortly after that the Lord did orchestrate you into a pastoral role. So what was your entrance into?
It was very shortly. So Mary died on Thanksgiving Day. On Christmas, Pastor Huber invited me over for Christmas dinner because I had nobody to eat with. He could eat my own dinner at home, right? And so he invited me over and said, "I want you to start counseling in the church. We have some people who need help, and I think you'd be good."
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much when I went and talked to my boss at the city, and I said, I'm not getting anybody here for counseling. I got this experience, and my church is asking me to do some counseling there. He said, "Yeah, go do that. Said, don't worry about the page. Just go do that." So this, separation of church and state didn't work so well in this particular location, I think. But I wound up
typical Santa Monica.
Yeah. Particularly odd that liberal Santa Monica would pay for me to work at a conservative church, but otherwise. And all these people coming in with grief. I mean, I was literally crying after, 80% of my counseling meetings with people. A guy came in, his brother had died. Another guy came in whose wife had left him for another man. I mean, just one thing after another. And so I was kind of pushed up against all these emotions and this sense. And I think that was part of God's annealing of my soul, was working through all those things to speak to me about how I live with this, because it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away. To this day, it doesn't go away. But it's an emotion, and that's different from a determination to live a life that's useful to others, helpful, God oriented, and God used. And so that's what I began to try to do. And I gave up on dating, though, and so it was a couple of years later when a friend. A mutual friend came up and said, "Hey, Karen Gill and her boyfriend just broke up. She's right back there. Go ask her out." And I said, "I'm not dating anymore. This is like, I'm like a pariah. I'm the guy whose wife died. Nobody wants to marry me." And he said, No, just go ask her out one date, just one date. Go ask her out right now. Go on, do it.
Was this normal? Is this something that happened? Like people felt that level of of purchase on your life to come up and say, right now, go ask that person out. Like this moment.
No, that was not uncommon. Okay. It was like the whole church was trying to fix me, And Karen had been a friend. Actually, she had been a friend of Mary's. The three of us took a class here at one point together, and we were. So it wasn't like I didn't know her. We were friends. And so I went back there and I said, I got tomorrow night. You want to go get dinner? She says, yeah, okay. And so it's very casual. And so we went out the next night and had just a terrible date. Just a terrible date. God, we didn't know what to say to each other. And so it's this long periods of silence. Anyway, so I dropped her off that, okay, I've done my job. I've done my duty, fulfilled my obligation. I'm done. Next morning on my, in those days we had phone machines, we didn't have phones in our pockets. So on my phone machine was a note from her saying, hey, thanks for the time last night. It's a good dinner. You mentioned a book. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the book. What was the book and what can you tell me about it? And so I called her back and said, yeah, I talked about the book and I can actually give you my copy if you want. She said, yeah, let's meet for coffee. And so we suddenly had a second date. And then she had mentioned something, called her back, and I said, I liked what you said about that. Can I get a copy of that tape of that talk? And this went on we were back and forthing, I don't know, for a couple months until we began to become like regular. And she didn't mind that I had this big, huge loss. I mean, it was sad, but it didn't affect her. She wasn't treating me funny or special or anything. She was just being her. And I realized there were a lot of other guys dating her too. So it wasn't like it was just me. But I didn't know what to do with her. I really liked her, but I didn't know what to do with her. So I just kept kind of stalling off. And so one day, here's the part that I don't like to tell people. So hang on. I was at church.
Don't worry, Jim. It's just the three of us.
Okay. That's what I'm thinking.
Go ahead and whisper it into the microphone.
In this little room. It's great. I was here, and I here at church, and went over to Cafe 50s for lunch, and thinking about her and thinking what to do. I think I should probably just break up with her. We should end this. Just end this. This is ridiculous. And I'm walking back across the street, and I'm halfway across Barrington at the corner here, halfway across. Traffic everywhere, right? And God speaks to me out of the sky, literally in a verbal voice. He says, I want you to marry Karen. Now, there wasn't anybody else around. I looked around to see if there was somebody there, like her dad or someone, There was no, it was clearly a verbal, audio voice in the middle of the street. A truck nearly killed me right there, but it didn't. And I thought, well, what was that? So I went home and thought about it for like 2 weeks, and I thought, well, I think that was the voice of God. I think I have to, act on that. And so I didn't know even how to ask her to marry me. And so I think I wound up apologizing and saying, I think that you probably don't want to do this, but we probably should. It's just the worst, asking ever.
Just again to interject here.
Yeah.
So Jim is not a guy that hears God talk all the time. Because there are people out there who are like, oh yeah, I was wondering what I should get. God told me Denver. People who do this sort of thing to kind of justify their decisions. Yeah. Jim is the furthest person from this guy.
And believe me, he has not said a word to me since, by the
way. So it's just fascinating. And then to have it turn into this I don't know, apologetic proposal. Again, some guys play that card, right? Where it's like, you know what, look, I really like it, but it's not me, it's God that wants us to be together. But not Jim. Jim's coming out the entire other direction.
Yeah. It was just, it was such stress. Anyway, so I think it was, we were, by the time we were pretty, serious. And so on New Year's, Christmas Eve, I think it was, I took her down to the music center. It was freezing cold. I thought it'd be romantic, but we were icy. And, said, all right, well, will you marry me? And she said, yes. And so we did one quick kiss, and then we got back in the heated car and went home. So I had already been shopping for trying to do a wedding ring, an engagement ring. And I wanted to make one for her that spoke to her. And so I it took me so long that I gave her the engagement ring as she was standing in what is our prayer room now beside this sanctuary on the day of our wedding in her wedding dress. That's when she got the engagement ring. And so like 30 minutes later, she got the wedding ring. But it had a diamond in the middle and sapphires around it because I thought she, like me, has had dark periods in her life. And the dark periods are what make the diamond shine brighter, that she had that. And I wanted that ring to symbolize that. So I got her that ring, and she totally understood what it was about. And that really helped me to, I think, enter into the marriage with some sense of, we can do this. So then, we had all the wonderful issues of fighting through the first year of being married, which is just wonderful. But she's she didn't take anything off me. She's a wonderful, wonderful fighter. And you kind of have to be, to be married to a Leonard, I think. But anyway, I think we've had a great year, a great bunch of years. We're on 26 now, just past our anniversary.
Wow. And so at the same time, you were serving the church as a pastor, and when we can, we'll actually get into that a little bit more in the next episode when we talk about that. But what was, how long before the merge, how long were you a pastor here at First Baptist?
Let's see. I think it was January of '86 when I started the volunteer counseling. I think Dr. Huber put me on payroll in October of '86. And then I came full-time in January of '87, I think. And then then he told me he was leaving. And I would be the interim pastor. I think, thank you very much. I think that was like '89 or something like that. But I was already full-time at that point. So I usually say I was on staff from October of '86.
Okay.
Pretty much continually till now.
And how many times have you been the interim pastor?
Twice.
Okay.
Is it 3 times? I think it's twice. Something like that.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's a whole nother story, but or stories.
Yeah. Yeah. That's bad. Yeah.
But the Lord's, I mean, what's exciting to me is just to continue to see the God things, as you call them, right? The Lord directing in this life through, I think the type of journey that, even one of those twists and turns, you feel like may have been just the end of it, but the Lord has continued to care for and draw you along and teach you. And I think, to Brian's point, I think this is what many of us actually, and not just pastors, but many of us in the church, not only appreciate, but desire to emulate in your life, is that the presence and steadfastness that looks different even than I think we would manage it to look. I think sometimes when I try to bring about steadfastness in my own life, it's a very managed steadfastness. Like, okay, let me make sure I can, handle this and make it work and, figure it out. I mean, that not foreign to you and my personality, but in either of you.
Yeah. Calamity is hard to manage. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, I mean, great joy is hard to manage. I mean, you take your Indiana Jones movie or any movie like that. I think that's a good parable. I mean, I think many people, they fail to recognize that life is a series of God-directed adventures. He directed them. It's not like, I mean, he knew what was going to happen with Mary. He knew what that was going to be like. He knew how I was going to react. He knew that Karen was. He positioned her for me and me for her at just the right stage. Mary is the one who brought me to Christ. Is that funny? Yeah. I just think that's hilarious. And that's after I led her in the sinner's prayer, right? Yeah. Then she brought me to Christ. And I just think God has a miraculous and wonderful hand on you, but it's very subtle. And sometimes it's pretty far out there. So he manages the parameters and lets you, just drown in the middle somewhere, but he's moving the pool while you're drowning in it, and he aligns you up for the next thing. It's just powerful, and I just I'm stunned and grateful, and love what he's given me to be able to counsel from. It's hard to find any place lower than I've been, and so I can speak in that direction.
Well, I hope this even opens up the door for people that maybe in our midst, maybe in our church family, don't know the backstory, haven't been there, haven't known even just these snippets of it. Might open the door for people to be like, oh, wait, there is somebody I could talk to. There's somebody who might know the depths of what I'm going through. And I'm thankful for the role you play in that in our lives as your fellow pastors, but also for the ways that the ways that the Lord uses you to play that role in our church family. It truly is a privilege to get to serve with you.
Well, I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God for the experience. It's hard to say, but it's true.
Absolutely. I just feel like this whole story just declares, just like we were talking about this morning, just declares the glory of God at every turn.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing to get to be said about your life.
Yeah.
Even with all the twists and turns.
Yeah.
So, well, thanks, Jim. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for sharing with us. And thanks everybody for joining us and listening. We love you, and we will see you on Sunday.
Okay. Thank you, God.